tuning in. Hello and welcome to our online seminar on navigating Scope 3 emissions, strategies, obstacles and opportunities across the value chain, which takes place in the framework of the German Mining Network. My name is Sophie Hoeisel and I'm Project Manager in Energy, Mining and Sustainability at the German-Chilean Chamber of Commerce, AHK Chile, and I'm happy to guide you through today's session. I'm very happy to welcome our participants and speakers from around the world. A special thanks as well to the BMWK, which supports and funds network activities. Thanks and welcome as well to our German Mining Network partner institutions, DIHK, GTAI, DERA and RWTH Aachen University, and to my dear colleagues from the other competence centers of mining and raw materials located at the other 7 AHKs around the world who are joining us today. But before we start with our presentations today, I would like to hand over to my colleague Iris Wunderlich, head of the Competence Center for Mining and Raw Materials at AHK Chile, who will open the webinar for us. Welcome, Iris.
Thank you very much, Sophie. It's an honor to be here and to say hello to everybody. So from my side, from the German Mining Network, for the German Mining Network, and very welcome to the Navigating Scope 3 Emissions webinar. We are looking at strategies, obstacles, and opportunities across the value chain. I am Iris Wunderlich, as Sophie told you. I'm with a very bad cold, so I'm sorry for that. I'm actually head of Competence Center for Mining and Raw Materials here at the German-Chilean Chamber of Commerce. as Sophie already mentioned. And well, the German Mining Network, supported by the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, stands for the 8 competence centers all over the world, starting in the Americas, Canada, Brazil, Peru, also Chile, of course. And then the African continent, Southern Africa, then Ghana, Western Africa, and Australia, and China. And we also have people from the German Mining Network in Mongolia and Kazakhstan. And we have, on the other hand, our strategic partners in Germany, the German Mineral Resource Agency, DERA, and the Association of German Chambers, the DIHK, and also Germany, Trade and Invest, GTAI, and obviously also RWTH Aachen University. So together over the years, we have supported numerous German companies in our markets and identified local needs and fostering like this collaboration. And the systematic interconnection facilitated by the German network is a very big opportunity. It allows us to concrete business opportunities for German companies, especially for the small and medium-sized enterprises, where we have our focus in the German chambers. And well, additionally, events like this one, like this webinar, provide us like a platform to discuss current challenges, trends, and also opportunities. So the mining industry, the challenges are obvious. The challenges associated with scope 3 emissions, having more sustainable mining, extraction, but also sustainable value chains. It's a very big challenge, and I hope we can contribute with this webinar to face them, to talk about them, and also to look for the opportunities which lie in them. So we'll explore various approaches to identify and to measure these emissions, discuss the challenges in reducing them, and then try to highlight the opportunities to enhance sustainability across those value chains. So thank you very much for your participation, and I look forward to an informative, engaging session. And back to Sophie, and I'm so glad this is not a present event and only a webinar, because well, I think I'm with a very bad cold, and you're lucky not to be here with me. Back to Sophie.
Thank you very much, Iris, for taking the time to open our webinar despite your cold, so very appreciated. And yeah, now before we start with our presentations, I would like to kindly invite you to write all your questions or comments in the chat so we can answer them later on. And now I would like to welcome our first speaker of the day, Annalena Hackelsberger, who is Project Lead for Environmental Sustainability at EconSense, Sustainable Development Forum of the German Economy, who will give us an introductory overview about the topic of Scope 3 emissions. So yeah, welcome, Ms. Hackelsberger. I see you already shared your screen, so perfect. We are ready to go.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, and welcome to everyone. I share the same fate as Iris, so I also have a very shaky voice, but I'm hoping it will guide me through at least the next 15-20 minutes. So bear with me on that one. Yeah, so I was asked to give a little bit of an introduction on Scope 3 emissions, but maybe let me first introduce myself. My name is Annalena. I lead the cluster Climate and Environment at EconSense, and I'm pretty sure that most of you won't know EconSense, so that's why I brought maybe just one slide to give you a little bit of background as to who I'm speaking for. So EconSense is the German Business Sustainability Network. I think Chile also has one. Basically every country around the world has one business network, and we are all headed by the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, which is our head organization. EconSense currently has 49 member companies. You can see the logos here. So they're not from one sector, but really from across the entire industry. And our goal is, of course, to shape and lead on the sustainability debate, especially in the private sector. How do we do that? We work in different focus groups with the sustainability managers in those companies. And I specifically work on all environmental topics, so climate, energy, circular economy, biodiversity, and nature being one topic that has a lot of momentum right now. But my colleagues also work on human rights due diligence, so the social aspects of sustainability, sustainable finance, and sustainability reporting. And so we always try to bring those corporates in touch with each other, but also in touch with decision makers in civil society, in politics and ministries. But important to note here, we're not a lobbying organization, so therefore we don't represent those 49 companies, but we offer them a forum for exchange. So I was asked to give a little bit of an introduction on the critical role of Scope 3 emissions. It's pretty high on the agenda of all of our member companies, pretty much, and also on the status quo regarding Scope 3 reductions. And then I will briefly touch upon obstacles and opportunities, but I heard that there's also speakers from the private sector who can much better than me talk about those topics. So focus will definitely be on the introduction part. Maybe as a starter, because that's always the basis for any corporate climate strategy, is climate science. And of course, there's thousands of pages and reports, but if you really boil down corporate or climate science for corporates, it's usually these three messages. We need to cut emissions in half by 2030. We need to get to net zero by 2050 at the latest. And then afterwards, we need to be net negative, meaning that we remove more from the atmosphere than we emit into it. And that, as I said, builds the basis for corporate climate strategies, which should always adopt a double materiality perspective. That's not a new concept, but one that has really been reinforced by one directive coming from the European Union that is really on top of everybody's minds right now, which is the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which once again highlights that companies need to take this a double materiality approach, meaning that they both need to look at what is my impact as a company, for example, through my emissions on climate change. But on the other hand side, also, what is the effect of ongoing climate change on my company? What are the risks, but also the opportunities from that? And it's also common knowledge that it's not enough for companies to only look at their own operations, but that they also have to look at their upstream supply chain, so the products and services that they source, for example, and their downstream value chain, so everything that happens to their products after they leave the corporate gates. And of course, Scope 3 emissions are part of your own impact as a company. And to maybe embed that a little bit into the broader narrative of climate strategies, usually when we talk to companies, and that's what you will see and find in most sustainability reports or corporate climate strategies, that there's three pillars. Of course, the first priority for any company is to reduce their emissions as much as possible. And it's an ongoing debate how many residual emissions each sector, each company is allowed to have, but there's guidance from different initiatives that kind of calculate how much can be left in the end. And then sort of the second pillar comes into play, offsetting with neutralization and compensation. A lot of controversy on that, and that's also not the focus for today. But just wanted to show you how this, in our view, fits into the broader Scope 3 discussion. Of course, in order to set targets, you first need to know your baseline. Your baseline is a greenhouse gas inventory. And luckily, there's one standard that is really being used by all companies across the world, which is called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, as the name suggests, is not only about CO2, but also about other greenhouse gases like methane or nitrous oxide. And then as part of this protocol, emissions are clustered in three buckets, Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 emissions are the direct greenhouse gas emissions from the sources that you as a company control and own, usually from combustion processes. So for example, if you are a power producer and you still produce power from coal or gas power plants, those are your scope 1 emissions. Usually, if you're not a heavy industry company, usually for most companies, this is a minor share of their corporate footprint. The second category, scope 2, are your indirect greenhouse gas emissions from the purchase of energy. So for example, if you buy power from another company or power from, say, the regular power mix, there will still be some gray emissions in there because we're not at 100% renewables yet. So therefore, those emissions are also attributed to your emissions balance, although they originate somewhere else. So you can see already here that there is a certain amount of double counting inherent in the system, and that's also desired that way, that multiple economic actors take responsibility for the same amount of emissions. Scope 2 emissions also for most companies a minor share, so less than 10% of their corporate footprint. The majority of greenhouse gas emissions are usually in the scope 3 bucket, and scope 3 are like a catch-all category for all other indirect emissions that either originate upstream or downstream the value chain. And as I said, usually the largest category, but of course also the most difficult to reduce. However, it has become absolutely common practice and accepted not only by environmental NGOs, but also by corporate business leaders that companies need to take responsibility for their full value chain emissions and not only for the emissions that are easy to control and relatively easy to reduce. And because scope 3 is such a huge amount of emissions, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol further subdivided scope 3 emissions into 15 categories, depending on whether they originate upstream, which are the 8 categories that you can see here, or downstream, which are the categories below. So maybe a couple of examples. For most companies, quite an important category is 3.1, so purchase goods and services, because those goods and services that you buy do not only come with a price, they also come with a CO2 backpack, and you also buy this CO2 backpack. The same goes, for example, for upstream transportation. So when these goods are transported to your corporate gates, that also has a footprint, and that is also attributed to your balance. The same goes for business travel or the commuting of your employees, for example. Another major category is downstream value chain emissions, use of sold products, 3.11. So an example would be a car manufacturer selling a car. If you then drive this car, the emissions from driving this car are attributed back to the OEM that sold you the car. Same goes, for example, for an energy company that sells gas. If you use the gas for heating, the emissions are attributed to this company. And here maybe we usually use this for a bootcamp that we offer for our new joiners in our network. Maybe you can have a look real quick. We won't be making this a competitive quiz, but maybe this is a nice illustration of corporate footprints. You can see the footprints of the 5 companies listed on the right-hand side here. You can see in the middle that they differ in size. So some corporate footprints are way bigger than others, and also they vary sort of in the share of emissions, how much scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions they have. And as a comparison, I also put in below the global greenhouse gas emissions as well as the greenhouse gas emissions of Germany. You can see that some companies even have bigger footprints than Germany in its entirety, which shows once again how much how big the scope 3 footprint can be. Maybe have a look, and then I can solve this real quick. So basically here you can see it. So there's 2 companies in this sample here, RWE producing power still from in parts from coal and gas, and ThyssenKrupp producing steel. So those 2 companies have a lot of scope 1 emissions. Another example from our network would be Deutsche Lufthansa as an aviation company, still flying with fossil fuel-based kerosene. But the other three companies, Siemens Energy, Vodafone, and Volkswagen, having more than 90% in scope 3. Examples of Siemens Energy, for example, they sell gas turbines. So if they are then used, those emissions are attributed to Siemens Energy. And Volkswagen is the example I just made. It's basically the same footprint for all large car manufacturers. So it could also be Mercedes or BMW. It's partly the inputs that they source. So for example, now with the switch to electric vehicles, it's mostly the footprints of batteries. But above all, right now, it's the use phase emissions. So if they sell cars, you drive the car, those emissions are attributed back to the OEMs. Yeah, so that's just as an illustration of footprints. Of course, it's not enough to only look at your baseline and to calculate how many emissions you have. You then also, of course, have to take action. And first step of taking action is usually to set targets. And there's one organization that we also closely work with, which has become kind of the gold standard for climate targets, which is the Science Based Targets Initiative. And I just wanted to show you that this is really an initiative which has a lot of momentum, especially in Europe and in Germany. So 70% of our 49 member companies already have validated near-term science-based targets, meaning that they have targets stretching out 5 to 10 years into the future. A little less for the listed DAX 40 companies, and globally there's 3,700 companies with targets also for their scope 3 emissions. And last week we actually had a call, which is why I have this data for our network. The 34 companies that have targets also have a scope 3 target, and you can see on the left-hand side that on average companies or companies in our network intend to reduce their emissions by roughly 3% year on year. However, and I think that's also important to be transparent on that, in our network, there's basically no company on track with that. So most companies are on track regarding their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but regarding scope 3, there is a lot of question marks as to how these emissions can be reduced by the amounts required also by the SBTI, but also by climate science ultimately. So we're definitely not on track regarding those emissions. Why are we not on track? Why are scope 3 emissions so difficult to reduce? And maybe just a couple of points, because I'm sure the other speakers will have much more to say on this. Basically, I mean, one of the most central problems is that companies have very far-fetched global supply chains, a lot of different products, a lot of different suppliers. Also, the supplier base is not static, so sometimes suppliers change year on year, which makes it really difficult to have like a regular exchange and engagement process with the suppliers. Companies don't really have transparency over their tier N suppliers, so usually they have a lot of transparency on their tier 1 suppliers, but the further down the supply chain, the less data they have. Also, they don't really have any automated data sharing, so usually it's Excel files being sent around and then being consolidated, which is of course not very efficient. And also, if you look at the internal perspective, what we often hear from procurement managers in companies is that there's still competing incentives where procurement managers really optimize for prices and not really optimize for carbon intensity. And another obstacle is, of course, for some of these points, like we talked earlier about electric vehicles. So therefore, you, for example, need the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure. So here you also need public support and are kind of reliant on a global, a broader infrastructure to actually work. And what we also see is a lot of supply chain regulation, not only on environmental topics. We now also see it for topics such as biodiversity and deforestation-free supply chains. We see it especially in Germany. We have a human rights due diligence law, so it's quite difficult for corporates, I think, to bring together these various and different regulatory files and kind of harmonize the demands here. And lastly, maybe a little bit stylized and high level, what can companies actually do to reduce those emissions nevertheless? Of course, one of the strongest levers is business model innovation. So for example, setting a price on carbon, because that can incentivize or that can inform M&A activities, that can inform investment decisions, which ultimately have a large impact on your Scope 3 emissions. But you can also, with, for example, more circular business models or a more circular product design that emphasizes a longer product lifespan, you can also reduce your Scope 3 emissions. Then, of course, supplier engagement. So we at EconSense also have an OEM, an SME network for smaller and medium-sized companies, where we try to do capability building, not only on the regulatory news coming from the EU, but also, for example, looking at Scope 3 emissions and offering collaboration opportunities for companies. Then procurement policy. I think an obvious first step would be to include carbon and circularity criteria into your procurement policy. And ultimately, of course, you can switch to new suppliers if they offer more carbon-friendly solutions, or stay with your supplier and incentivize them to offer products with a reduced carbon footprint. And if you have a lot of exposure downstream your value chain, of course, one lever would be to engage your customers, to educate them, to collaborate with them, and to nudge them to use your products in a more carbon-friendly and efficient way. And lastly, that's my last slide, what we also see is that companies want to engage in different forms of value chain initiatives in order to work on different objectives, for example, to standardize data exchange. One initiative here in Germany is Catena X. A lot of our member companies are part of that, to implement joint auditing processes, so you don't have to audit single suppliers every time for the same kind of data, but to have like a joint process. Together for Sustainability would be one example from the chemical industry. We also see that companies group together in order to increase their purchasing power, especially, for example, when it comes to nascent technologies like green hydrogen. We see that, for example, at the World Economic Forum's First Mover Coalition. And of course, I think it's important that they have spaces where they can learn from peers and exchange best practices, like you do today, like we do at EconSense, like a lot of other organizations do at the moment. And that's why I think it's great to have this exchange here. Thanks again for inviting me. I hope this has been a helpful introduction, and I'm happy to answer any questions should there be any.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation and overview. So far, we didn't receive any questions, but to all participants, please feel free to leave your questions in the chat so we can answer them maybe later on. And now I'm happy to announce our next panelist, Mathieu Collignon, Carbon Reporting Manager at Glencore, who will tell us more about Glencore's experience, challenges, and approaches to dealing with Scope 3 emissions. Welcome, Mathieu. We're very glad to have you here. Please turn on your microphone, and we're excited to hear more about it.
It's good. Let me just get the slides up that I prepared for you all. First of all, thank you so very much for inviting me to speak today. It was a last-minute invitation, so I don't come as prepared as Anna just did, but I have a couple of slides and I have a lot to say about Glencore's approach to Scope 3 emission accounting and reporting. So let me see if I can change the slides. That would be helpful. Yes, it's just a bit slower. Good. All right, so like most others, I would say, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol informs our approach to Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions accounting. Glencore has a long-standing practice of annually reporting our emissions footprints. Nevertheless, what we include in our externally reported inventories has changed significantly over time. From 2011 to 2015, we reported only our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. Then come 2016, the first mention of Scope 3 emissions was made in our external reporting. And we continue to include Scope 3 emissions in our publicly disclosed inventories to date. Now, what the driver of this was really, I wasn't there at the time, but I believe the Task Force of Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which Glencore adopted in 2017. This recommends that Scope 3 is included in the reported inventory if this is material. Now, for Glencore, being a diversified miner, also active in fossil fuel production, naturally, Category 11, use of sold products, is a very material Scope 3 category. So we have included those emissions from our 2017 sustainability reports onwards. Since then, the inclusion and the coverage of Scope 3 categories has been extended to 7 categories in total. Now, in general, from my experience, I would say that collecting Scope 3 activity data, emission factors, and calculating a Scope 3 inventory following the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standard is in itself relatively straightforward. The protocol provides very simplistic methodology options, in particular the spend-based approach for upstream Scope 3 and the average data approach for downstream Scope 3. However, these very high-level calculated, or more appropriate would say estimated Scope 3 inventories have very limited value. Spend-based calculations are no basis for assessing decarbonization opportunities in the reporting company's value chain. And that, of course, as the previous speaker also said, is one of the fundamental reasons for companies to calculate and really understand their Scope 3 emissions. What this requires is that companies report a quality Greenhouse Gas Protocol aligned Scope 3 inventory. And quality means in that context that it is reflective of company-specific value change. Now, this is where the real challenge lies. So quality Scope 3 reporting requires that company-specific mapping of all relevant value chains and value chain partners are completed. It also requires that companies design product-specific or company-specific interpretation of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standard, in particular relating to the boundaries of its overall reporting and the boundaries of Scope 3 categories. Essentially, what companies have to work out is which value chain emission is reported where. What this also requires is that companies shift from a reliance on secondary data, such as spend-based or industry average, to primary emissions data, collected directly from suppliers or customers or specific to the products that they purchase. Now, to design the rules, and I should move to the next slide, by the way, I kept going. To design the rules and implement quality Scope 3 reporting practices within a diversified company like Glencore, you can really go as far into the rabbit hole as you want. I've spent most of my past 2 years deep down a maze of rabbit holes trying to figure it out for Glencore. And every time I feel I get close on one element, a whole new can of worms presents itself. Nevertheless, I am pleased to be able to tell you that today we have made significant progress, the results of which we will publish in our 2023 Climate and Sustainability Reports due in the first quarter of next year. What we have developed is a new approach based still, of course, on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standards and guidance for collecting, verifying, calculating and reporting Scope 3 emissions. This methodology covers all 15 Scope 3 categories. Where a category is excluded or not calculated, a materiality or relevance assessment has been made such that the exclusion is justified. We collect data from over 30 data and source systems. Depending on the nature of the data, it is verified by sustainability representatives working for our 63 industrial assets, and by sustainability representatives in our departments. And ultimately, all this data comes in, is calculated and consolidated and prepared for external reporting by me. The processes that we follow are defined and documented at group level currently, and we are working very hard on further documentation for our departments and assets. So Scope 3 reporting, it's been for us and continues to be a massive undertaking and a very significant challenge. But I surely believe that I'm beginning to see the light at the end of the rabbit maze I'm in. And I would be very pleased to answer any questions or give more detail on our experience following this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martje, for interesting insights and to give us a practical example. Now I would like to hand over to Jorge Bravo, who is Head of Research and Project at Aprimin, and who will present to us a Scope 3 emissions calculator, which was a project led by Codelco and developed in collaboration with Aprimin, Altalay Corporation, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Welcome, Jorge. We are very excited to hear from supplier side the challenges around Scope 3 emissions.
Sweet, thank you. Cool. Thank you very much, Sophie, for the invitation. I'm gonna share my presentation. Just a sec. Okay, you should be seeing my screen, right?
Yes, we see your screen. Okay,
cool. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Very good morning to all my colleagues and guests. My name is Jorge Bravo. I'm the Manager of Studies and Project at Aprimin. Aprimin is the Mining Suppliers Association in Chile. We have 133 members, and I'm very honored to be part of this significant seminar, Navigating Scope 3 Emissions, Strategies, Obstacles, and Opportunity Across the Value Chain, organized by the German Mining Network. Chile, with its rich mining heritage, plays a pivotal role in the global mining sector. Our commitment towards sustainable mining practices and reducing carbon emission is not just a national agenda, but a global imperative. This seminar presents an invaluable opportunity for us and our members' company to collaborate, learn, and innovate strategies that can help mitigate Scope 3 emissions. We look forward to engaging discussion, knowledge exchange, and exploring new pathways to enhance sustainability across the entire mining value chain. Thank you for this opportunity to contribute and learn. As I just told you, Aprimin is the Mining Suppliers Association. We have this board of directors. Our president is Philippe Emerdinger. We have an executive committee with integrated with companies as Metso, Elecmetal, just one sec, Metso, Elecmetal, Arrigoni Group, Workmates, and we have a board of directors for companies like Finning, South America, which support the Caterpillar equipment, Aramark, Komatsu, Vulco Weir Minerals, NIX Explosive, Deloitte, and also Reliber. This is the board of directors of our association. We have an executive team. We are a small team. Our executive director is Sergio Hernandez. I am the head of studies and project, and we have an administrative team and the communication and marketing area. Okay, let's have a look at the mining suppliers in Chile. We have over 3,000 mining suppliers. We have 133 members in Aprimin. These companies generate more than 190,000 direct jobs and 350,000 indirect jobs. Our annual billing, our gross revenue, it's about 50 billions annually. And we have an 80% of female participation among our 133 companies. And we have the 56% of our members are Chilean companies and 44 international companies. And we like to show this number, these percentages, because when APRIMIN started, we used to be only international big companies, but the mining sector is so strong, and we are having more and more Chilean companies growing and going worldwide players. So it's now today we are more Chilean companies than international, and this is like 5 or 6 years since. So it's interesting. I would like to show you the 10 business risks and opportunities for mining and metals in this year, in 2023, according to EY. Is if you can see at the right of your screen, the number 10, the new business models, digital innovation, capital, workforce, supply and chain disruption, cost and productivity, and have a look at the 4 more important. The number 4 is license to operate, the social license. We are talking about climate change at number 3. The number 2, geopolitics, and number 1 is ESG. Just a few years ago, we were talking about cost and productivity, digital and innovation, but today the 4 more important are regarding to emissions, sustainability, ESG, etc. As Chile, we, in the period between 1980 and 2006, we signed over 18 environmental treaties, agreement, and regulation. After that, we get into the Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development, and so we were recommended to have to make more effort to have more information regarding to environmental indicators in order to strengthen the decision making and public information. We also were invited to organize the COP25 in 2019. We were considered a leader at the fight and adaptation to climate change, even though the country's CO2 emissions are equivalent to 0.3% of the worldwide. Some of the goals we have and we are working on we are going to closure of 28 coal power plants by 2040. And 20% of the country's energy will come from renewable energy by 2025. 2025 is tomorrow. So what about the industry? According to AHKs, AHK is the International Copper Association, and the copper production accounts for approximately 0.2% of the global greenhouse gas emission. This is currently low, but demand copper is expected to double by 2050, driven for the clean energy transition and also for the electric mobility. Have electric cars need 3 times more copper than normals. So copper miners and producers, we recognize that we have responsibility to mitigate our greenhouse gas emissions, and many companies we are working very strong in that area here, very close with mining companies and suppliers. Well, this is how it works. I think Anna explained this way better than I could, but I'm gonna stop just in the scope 1. The scope 1 in Chilean mining is mainly diesel and fuels and gasoline. The scope 2, well, the purchase of electricity. We have luckily we have very strong solar energy system and windy system, wind system energy from the south. So the scope 2 should be the quicker for us to work on. And we are working as a provider in the scope 3 of the mining suppliers. This is well, the upstream activities and the downstream activities. We as our members are in both activities working on reducing these carbon emissions. So let's have a look at the graph at your right, the copper mining emission in Chile in 2009. We have the 3 scopes here. The scope 1 represents the 19% of the total, the scope 2, the 30%, and the scope 3, 51%. This study is with one of the biggest companies, the mining companies in Chile, but we have more data, and this 51% goes between 50% and 70% in other mining, but we're gonna stop in this, we're gonna have a look at these numbers. This 51% of the scope 3 we're watching in this graph is the 30% came from mine activities in the mine, foundation and refinery, another 18%, and 3% of maritime transport of products, the big chips, the transport. So, and at the left we have different emissions from different mining countries like South Africa, Australia. Here is Chile, Canada, Finlandia, Peru, and Turkey, and this is the average of the CO2 tons emissions. This is in Chile mining. We have these reduction goals, and here in your left we have as a country we have the scope 1 and 2. We have for 2030 to reduce a 50% of the emission in compare with 2018 for scope 1 and 2, 50% of reduce. And for 2050, we have to reduce 70% and 100% of renewable energy for the scope 2. Here we have some local companies like Collahuasi, Antofagasta Minerals, Codelco, and MMG and Cerro Mantoso from Colombia. And here we have the scopes and the goals for the different years. So, for example, Collahuasi in scope 1, they have the goals to be net zero for 2040, Antofagasta Minerals net zero in 2045, and also for scope 1 and 2. And international companies operate, and have a look at Anglo America. They have the goal to be in 2035 net zero and a 50% of reduce of the scope 3 emissions. BHP also, they have, for now, they're using 100% of renewables. And they have 30% reduction for 2030 and net zero in 2045. So Rio Tinto and Glencore, similar, they have very strong goals for a very short agenda. So we were working here in a calculator of emissions. We have this calculator was financed by Codelco, developed by Alta Ley Corporation, and the collaborators were Sonami and Aprimin, and we also work with the International Development Bank for this project, for this tool. Well, how this is work. We have the inputs here. These are example like sulfuric acid, coal tires, grinding balls. The unit of this input, we have these international emission factors. This you can find it in different sources, like in here. And with this conversion, we can get doing this information of input, like could be like fuels, electric energy, or any other products, goes into this calculation tool, which is going to be a public tool. This is it can be used for anyone who's operating here in Chile, and you can get the result of your emission of the 3 scopes for mining supplier, which is the scope 3 for the mining companies. I cannot share some more information because this project is working on at this moment. We have now more companies. We started with Codelco, but now there are like 4 more big mining companies getting into this work. So it's work in progress. So here you have the QR where you can go into this. Huella Minera is the name of the calculator we are developing at this moment. This webpage is available, so you can get some. You can play introducing some of your product, and you're gonna know the footprint emission of that product. So we're keep working. We have our committee, sustainable committee, working very strong with mining companies with this calculator. We're working to have a standardized medition tool. So this is what I like to share with you today. The work we are doing as APRIMIN, the mining suppliers, very close with the mining industry here in Chile. So I'd be happy to have some question and answer. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jorge, for the interesting presentation. I see that Martje is raising her hand, so maybe you have a comment to the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for those slides. I just wanted to clarify that the targets that were presented for Glencore, they are incorrect. We have set ourselves a short-term target of a 15% reduction by 2026 versus a 2019 baseline. We have a medium-term target of a 50% reduction by 2035 on 2019 levels as well. And we have a long-term ambition of net zero total emissions by 2050. And our targets cover our reported scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions.
Thank you for the acceleration, Margie. I'm gonna have a check. The numbers that I show are from only for Chile, but I'm gonna have a look and I'm gonna correct that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see that we received a question in the chat. Let's open it really quick. Martin Vega is asking, why is South Africa so much higher in terms of CO2 emissions in the mining industry?
Sorry?
Why is South Africa so much higher in terms of CO2 emissions in the mining industry?
Oh, we have to have a look of the study of the. I think I have the source in the presentation. We can have a look in detail.
I can probably answer that.
Thank you.
Well, South Africa is primarily consuming coal-fired power produced by Eskom, and the generation of that power, the associated emissions are of course very, very large. And so that is typically why companies operating in South Africa have a very significant carbon footprint.
Great. Thank you very much for answering the question. I hope it's clarified. I don't know if any other panelist likes to add something on the question. If not, we are already coming to an end of our webinar today. And to formally conclude our session, I would like to hand over to my colleague and core coordinator of the network, Arti Sörensen, Research Assistant at RWTH Aachen University. Welcome, Arti, and thanks for being with us today to close the webinar.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me. Yeah, I think if one thing that we can take away from today is that it's really the complexity of Scope 3 emissions, and I have to congratulate Martje for her work and and Glencore for really tackling this challenging task of looking at reducing Scope 3 emissions in the mining sector. So yeah, I just wish to thank all the speakers for today, and just have a minor announcement that it may take some time for the German Mining Network to continue the webinar series due to some restructuring that we're doing with the network, kind of moving the center of contact to Germany, to the DIHK. But we wish everybody a great end of the year and a good start into 2024, and look forward to staying in touch and hopefully seeing you again in one of the future webinars. So yeah, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Arti. Thanks to all our participants and speakers today. For the session in the next day, we will send an email with all the presentations, and as well we will put the recording of the webinar on our website. So to stay up to date with the network and our activities, don't forget to visit our website, germanmining.net, and to follow us on LinkedIn as well, where we always post our next activities. So have a nice day and see you again for our next activities. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.